Well, thanks to those who are here, and hopefully some more joining. It was yeah, it was really nice to be invited. My name's Kristof Hayes. I'm the founder of List.io. We are a kind of appropriate technology startup based in the UK, and we really focus on kind of nature-friendly farming, regenerative farming, agroecological farming, and where and the technology needs for or non-needs of these businesses and individuals and organizations. I'm gonna kind of keep it informal in terms of narration. I'm not. It suits me better. I'm not your typical kind of VC pitch guy who rattles through. Um, I've prepared a bit of a presentation on the journey, like the story. We're still a young business. We're right at the beginning of our journey and exploring. But I've met a few of you already, and I'm kind of really, yeah, I really love the community that's starting to build, that you're starting to build over in North America, and I think I'd like to see Europe kind of close behind. I know that some of us are based over this side of the Atlantic, and uh, yeah, I guess I just want to share my story and see if it resonates with you, and see if any further conversations come of it. But yeah, I think I'm gonna go for it. I think the concept is a bit of a presentation, then chat discussion at the end. But if you feel particularly strong about any of my statements, or you wanna jump in and kind of ask then and there, or challenge or whatever, that's really cool as well. So feel free to speak up. I'm across a couple of screens here, so if I don't see something in the message box, just kind of feel free to interrupt me and just say, hey, can you take a look? Okay, nice. So yeah, a little bit about List.io, and I guess first my personal journey. So I come from a sort of family background, not so much in farming, but sort of organic vegetable market gardening, right? I think probably quite similar to the ideas that you were just discussing before we started, kind of growing vegetables initially at home, and then maybe kind of scaling it up to the local community, and then maybe even beyond. So my father's an Englishman, but he married my Hungarian mother. And so in the 90s, when I was a young kid, we moved to Hungary, where he initially started an organic market garden in an academic context for a local university, and started to trial the CSA method, so kind of like community supported agriculture, box schemes, that kind of thing. Organics in Hungary and Central Eastern Europe at the time was it was like it was fairly wacky in terms of like the new wave of it, but it was also very traditional in a way. There was clearly kind of industrial scale agriculture that had developed in the kind of post Second World War, second half of the 20th century, probably fairly similar actually to most other geographies. And that still reigns today. So Hungary is a very kind of productive arable landscape, and as such, it's probably quite far down the depleted route, down the industrialized scaled route, and so there's many issues with that economically and ecologically, and so we're really trying to kind of move back from that. And there's certain movements like the ones my family are into, which is a lot more kind of, okay, let's rethink the whole kind of social system around it as well, and how we can shorter food supply chains and all that stuff. So I'm very aware and sensitive to those stories. But really, I feel my own mission is as an engineer, which I kind of ended up studying and working in for some, I guess, a decade now. Is, I feel my role is to kind of serve this community of food production professionals who want to do it differently, who maybe aren't served by the current technology providers in the space, who are geared towards the high input, high output, kind of short-termist models, extractive models. And there's plenty of opportunity with a sort of subset of farmers, farming businesses, new entrants, ancient kind of communities kind of being re-amplified. There's many kind of opportunities to basically say, hey guys, if you wanna farm, like sort of grow food along principles that are steady state and in combination, in collaboration with nature, and you have needs for better tools, or you want to make use of the latest technologies that are available that we all do, right? Like, you won't find an organic market gardener who hasn't got a web shop. That would be crazy, because you just limit yourself. I mean, there might be a world where that exists, and who's to argue that that isn't the world we want to live in? But practically, we do want to make use of technology, including potentially scaling some of these models for maximum impact. So, or kind of fast impact as well, because we're running out of time. And so these are the principles that I'm exploring personally in my work, and increasingly within List.io, my project and kind of startup, commercial entity, you could say. We're not quite sure exactly how that's going to play out, but I'll get to that. And it's not really the point. The point is to explore this intersection, this Venn diagram, if you want to think about it that way, of like farming community who have technology needs, and technology community who have access to the next generation of open source software and hardware. Because let's not forget, farming is very, very real, and it touches the soil and it touches the ground. And eventually you're going to have to build tools, not just cool software. So that's where I feel that kind of robotics has potential. And that was kind of my experience, really. I studied electronics and I went into industrial automation. So I went to a lot of factories and I saw a lot of kind of principles on how do you automate manual, repeatable processes well, and what are the technologies available for that. And interestingly, I came up against fairly similar, this was before I knew too much about agricultural technology, let's call it the mainstream. But in industrial automation in factories, you basically had very similar concepts around a few vendors supporting the entire value chain. So I went to, you'd go to factories and it was Siemens or Bosch from top to bottom. So you'd have whole production lines with the machines, all one brand, running the same software. If something went wrong, you had to call Siemens, you had to, a service engineer would come and plug in a Siemens laptop with a Siemens bit of cable, and downloaded with, opened up the IDE, downloaded Siemens software. And so that was just as frustrating for an industrial client who was trying to, produce their product at a good margin, quickly and efficiently, as it is for a farmer who's stuck in the middle of the field because their John Deere tractor's given up on firmware, right? Not even hardware. So I think that's where my interest started with open source technology. And I'd kind of brushed shoulders with it at university, and kind of went into this kind of lockdown world of PLCs, programmable logic controllers, HMIs, SCADA systems, which are really good at reliability, repeatability, but fall down on any kind of integration, any kind of, let's say, kind of more like in making use of next generation and increasingly improving technology stacks. So one good example was, and I'm sorry, this is just a bit of background to how I ended up with List, and we'll get there, but it relates to this slide. I was increasingly getting involved with industrial IoT. So this was a concept where sensors were connected throughout an industrial process, and the value was to kind of make that process more efficient, more intelligent, sort of understand where bottlenecks were, understand where inefficiencies were in that system. And it was all reliant on data. And so capturing that data was a challenge, because you had to try and move into these closed control systems where those data points were being gathered, and then trying to integrate them into kind of open source Linux cloud-based systems, which, and the two worlds just wouldn't speak, or not easily anyway. And it was mostly related to kind of security, and every factory would be really paranoid about, connecting stuff to the internet. So that experience I brought into the agricultural world, and I always have to start at this like data end of the spectrum, which is kind of annoying for farmers, but it's natural for technology thinkers, right? So when I came into agriculture, I saw that we had kind of two ends of the data spectrum. So we had this like, and I call it kind of biodiversity, but it's just any kind of natural system. And you have the kind of human scale, the human end of the scale, where we have incredible intelligence, right? Like the type of intelligence that you can't mimic, you can't replicate, and we don't want to, which is passed down through generations. It relies on senses that we can never, it's just the perfect sensing machine the human is. And at the other end, we have Earth observation satellites, and probably you could extend that kind of spectrum further, but really these satellite systems, which are really good at just providing global coverage, low cost, commercially available for farmers, and they make decisions based on this, right? But the type of farmers who will benefit from them are the ones who are typically pushing very like blocky systems, and that's not necessarily out of just like choice. It's just like the system's already there, and therefore they're using satellite data to kind of fine tune and improve, and that's understandable. So then, it got me thinking, well, if we're into this world of IoT, and we know that connected sensors are really cool in a factory environment, but how are you going to instrument tens of thousands or millions of acres of farmland on the globe? I didn't really see that scaling, and I'm happy to be proven wrong. And I think evidence of this thinking is that drones are somewhere in between here. So we're starting to see machines that are basically one connected sensor or a number of connected sensors that can move around the place effectively. And this is what I was interested in building a prototype of on farmland, so on a small mobile robot. And why mobile? So why did it need to touch the ground? Well, it was really we're trying to get to soil. We're trying to get to soil health and sort of understand what happens below ground, because that is a real indication of how healthy our growing medium is, our biodiversity. And we can measure that above ground, and that's really cool. And we're kind of starting to dip our toes there as well. But really it's below soil that a lot of magic happens, and we know so little, right? So was really interested in building these small machines, and I had experience. So I was working for a robotics company that was looking at sports turf, and we were building fairly similar little buggies, and I thought, yeah, that's what I want to do, but I want to do it in farming. So, okay, so then we want to build this thing. Who do we need? Well, we need a team of engineers, and so that's how we got started. We are kind of robotics engineers. We're all a little bit part-time at the moment, as these early projects often are. Everyone's got side hustles, part-time jobs to pay for things. Some people will never be able to come full-time because they have other commitments, and that's also fine. We live in an age where I think people are just more really realize the potential for having multiple things at any one time. I don't think, people's interests are varied, and they're not static, they evolve as well. So, we're trying to build an organization based on those principles as well, where people can come and go and contribute and benefit and move on if they have to or want to, or stay for a long time and kind of dip in and out as they need to. I mean, practically that's more challenging than what it sounds like, but I think the principle I want to kind of embed as a bit of a value, because we are, well, yeah, it's what I want to do. I know that I want to commit to 10 years of exploring the intersection of appropriate technologies and regenerative farming, but in what vehicle and how, what exactly my role will be is unknown yet. So it will evolve. And it's fair to assume that other people's will as well. So just broadly, so there's kind of 4 of us engineers, and more recently we've had a farming partner join on a kind of fairly close basis, and we also have kind of more senior commercial advisors who are starting to come on board, which is really cool. But a bit more on that later. So talked a bit about that background, a bit of the bigger picture stuff, but how do we actually get started? So 2022, we wrote a grant here in the UK. We have something called Innovate UK, which is a funding body that essentially supports primarily technology businesses, but just young businesses who are wanting to innovate. So kind of making use of a key bit of new technology in a key sector. So robotics, AI, and agriculture kind of tick those boxes, especially here in the UK, where we are, well, don't want to go there, but as a result of kind of leaving the European markets, we are really thinking hard about our own food systems. In a way, it's an opportunity as well to become a lot more resilient, a lot more self-sufficient. And also on the technology side, we want to make sure that we're kind of skilling up and potentially exporting and kind of developing skills as a community. So there's an incentive for a public body to kind of fund innovation, research, experimentation in this field. And so the concept was to build this initial discover underground, right? This initial little buggy autonomous machine that can go around, poke the ground, take measurements, and report that back and kind of start that journey of exploration while into the farming world, into the real needs of regenerative farmers, while building up real capabilities on the technical side. So a few images here, right? So typically we are based in London, so kind of urban workshop environments. And then we would test, so then we would test individual submodules. This is our penetrometer. It goes vertically down. You see it here. It takes a measurement, and that's what it does. So we would test it initially in the lab environment. Then we'd probably take it to the park. Then we would take it out onto a farm. So here it is again. And so this is important because rather than kind of shutting ourselves away for 2 years of robotics R&D and millions of pounds of a check, we are doing this innovation yeah, sorry, I'm just looking at some of the comments, but we can maybe come back to those. We need to show farmers real things, even if they're not perfect, because it starts a conversation. And even if they poo-poo the idea, which they will, guaranteed, it starts a conversation. And it's much better to show them a half-baked bit of real thing that moves around their field, as opposed to a brilliant model that works on paper, that works financially, but never sees daylight. And we've had a few examples of this in the UK. I'm not sure how familiar you are, but a few startups that have gone really multiple years of R&D and didn't quite hack it on the commercial side, by which time it was so expensive, so complex, that it was impossible to adopt. And so we're really trying hard to kind of work on these proof of concepts, right? Things that just capture the imagination. And Chris, who's on the call, would have seen this robot a year ago at Groundswell, which is one of our festivals for regenerative farming. And all it was a conversation starter. I didn't expect this to be selling tens of units. It was for me to learn more, right? It was to take something to the community and start conversations. And through those conversations, you learn about the next, sorry, this is starting again, but you learn about the next requirements. Oh, okay, I'm going to do it this way. Cool. So then I talked about kind of underground and poking the ground. And then I guess Ben put the title kind of robotics and AI, and I guess that is true. So we are kind of looking at applied AI or machine learning or computer vision type applications. And why is that? So I have this concept that I would much rather have a number of low-cost sensors that gather a cluster of information at ground level, and then we generate a kind of rich data set that we can mine, as opposed to kind of having like a one single sensor that is deployed very well and that's it. So we did quite a lot of we know quite a lot about the current state of the soil sensing market, like in situ. We know that we don't want to collect soil samples. It's not really what we're doing. There's other companies that are doing it well. I mean, never say never. Like if we might collaborate or something, but I'm definitely focused on in situ sensing because it makes the machine small. Those sensors are coming up, and there's some really exciting ones from kind of your side of the pond that I'm basically talking to. They tend to be based on like optics, so kind of hyperspectral, multispectral cameras, some that go down subsoil, and that really, amazing kind of like images underground. The cost of those sensors is massive. So that's another barrier of entry. And I kind of believe in the democratizing principle of a low cost bit of hardware. So like the Raspberry Pi was like a mind blowing thing for me. And so yeah, I kind of believe that technology should be affordable and available to a much wider group of, in this case, farming community than is maybe currently available. And so part of that is exploring really low cost vision systems, really low cost like audio systems like microphones, computing systems, and including robots, like getting it around. And how do we keep those costs low? Well, we're aware of the best in class technology. For certain projects, for certain applications, they will be the best ones to reach for. But in terms of kind of making this technology available, adoptable, we have to kind of also show what the baselines are, and those baselines are going down. Now, the flip side of that is that you need to be skilled. And so, you know, those of you who are aware of open source software will know that there's a trade-off between something that is completely free and is essentially a bag of components. Then you need to put the time into building something, and that's fine. And the models have moved, like in the software world, in the IT world, they've worked remarkably well, very fast. People have moved towards, you know, there's Microsoft engineers who are writing open source code all day long, and they're getting paid by Microsoft to do that. That's kind of huge. Like, imagine John Deere staff engineers pumping out open source, you know, agricultural machinery designs. We're not quite there yet, but could we be there? Maybe, I don't know. So anyway, back to the kind of vision capabilities. So the next grant, I sort of told you that in our current context in the UK, a good way for us to get started is around these grants, so grant-funded projects. And so, yeah, so the grant after autonomous soil health monitoring, or DOUG, we started working on grassland AI. So this was really sort of strapping a very simple camera onto the back of the robot and essentially going out to those same farmers. And again, notice how the objective is as much to start and continue conversations as it is to improve our intellectual property. So it's both, but it's very, very essential that we also make headway in developing relationships with the right type of, so, and kind of learn about how we can farm differently from those who are doing it, and vice versa, show them what we're working on and kind of inspire them, or prompt questions or confusion, whatever comes up. So, right, so computer vision, right? So we literally hit a rotational grazing field. Like you can see, it's quite a nice, diverse little farm. There's some agroforestry happening there. So some kind of 1 or 2 year old saplings with some bees in between. This paddock gets grazed in rotation. So really cool kind of multi-layered experiment environment, and we just turned up. It was relatively close to where we are, so we just turned up, built a relationship with Regeneration Earth, they're called, and starting noticing different species. Okay, cool. Like, why is there clover in some places and not others? Well, clover, it turns out, is a nitrogen fixing crop. So it actually, farmers will proactively plant this in order to save on their synthetic nitrogen inputs, which is a huge cost, a volatile cost. So here we touched on something that was interesting. It was economically and ecologically beneficial to plant a certain crop to build resilience in both those areas. Okay, great. So now we're in the, we might not have a business model yet, because our monitoring solution might bleed from a million wounds, or it might be way too expensive still. But is there benefit in growing, in sort of companion cropping, or overseeding, or whatever? I don't know the proper terminology, but kind of growing clover, yes, there is. You're going to fix nitrogen, which helps plant growth in your primary crop. Also, if you're grazing it, it's a protein input. It's a nutritional value to your herd, and so there's these stacked benefits start coming into it. So currently, what are our capabilities? Well, we've built a model where we can train our camera system onto pretty much any crop, and we did clover because green on green is a bit of a challenge, but it's not a super challenge of like what variant of wheat are you? And it's, at least it's kind of round You can see here a little bit kind of round leaves over straight. And so we're able to pick them up like you see on that model. And we're running live inference. We're quantifying each image. We essentially count the number of leaves of clover. And we can give a kind of heat map. And so we can we did this about a month ago on a farm, a different farm. And it was a field about, I don't know, about a hectare probably. And I think we did 300 sampled images. So we could do it continuously, but we kind of tend to sample and collect that and build a heat map. So this is sort of getting closer to something that is useful in a real commercial farming operation. Why? Because you might go out, and if this is a crop, you might be applying, you might be switching off your sprayer in this zone, or ideally automating where your sprayer switches off to save you some on the expensive nitrogen input. Okay, sweet. Let's move on. Okay, so this is where I guess I want to emphasize this is kind of starting to form part of our offering, maybe. So, we'd love to come to farms and say, hey, like we can do an autonomous site survey of your field in exchange for covering our costs or a small fee or a lunch, or I don't know, right? But that's the beginnings of starting to think like we have an offering, and that's important to stay alive, to be around this time next year and keep telling this story. So these are just examples of the machine moving around predefined points and kind of taking those samples, pictures and soil measurements, I should say, and we can scale that up to multiple hundreds of points. And just another one here, little video that we built, kind of little reel, just showing our development process, which is probably not a classic kind of large corporate model. But yeah, there we are with some happy farmers, back and forth, lab work, field work, capturing data, training models, bashing into cars. It's fun. Okay, I think I'm going to move on now. It looks like it's restarted. Okay, so I've kind of covered in this. Gosh, it's already been half an hour, so I'm gonna yeah, be aware of time. I'd like to kind of limit my chat to an hour so that we have some time to have questions and discussion as well. So I've kind of talked about the monitoring side, and one important piece of truth is that we take this monitoring solution that's becoming smarter and smarter every week, every month. We take it out to real farms and we show it to real farmers, and they say, great, amazing, but it doesn't help me. I can't see how this is adding value. However, I'm really intrigued by your engineering skills in getting that small machine around the place on its own. How do you do that? So could you build a different machine with tools on it, a tractor or some kind of farming implement without a driver? That would be really cool. So, that we'd be interested in. And so the reason it was important to have discussions in the first place, to get out of the lab quickly, and even showing an imperfect system to someone, is that it leads to these discussions, these relationships starting to form, and the needs, right? So we as engineers, we're building requirements lists. So essentially that's what happened. And so it was clear that we needed a better platform, right? The little thing that you saw out there, that was never going to pull any kind of implement, even if it's even in a trial type environment. So we had a look around, right? We're not, we didn't want to spend 6 months kind of building a mechanical platform that isn't really our expertise, isn't really what we're trying to do. And we kind of toyed with the idea. We added up the bill of materials, and we were like, there's stuff out there that is realistically cheaper and available. And so we found something in the US called FarmNG. They're a small startup as well. They came from the organic veg growing community in California. And you can tell that this little machine it's really cool. The reason it stuck with me is because it's useful as an electric wheelbarrow or little. One of you was talking about kind of hauling a lot of compost into your raised beds earlier. Well, this is exactly what they use it for. So, you're kind of saying, why should I not benefit from electric drives and controllers that are suddenly available at a fraction of the cost of what they were? Why should I not build myself the next generation of a wheelbarrow? It's not even a robot. It's not AI. It's nothing. It's just an electric wheelbarrow. And the cost, like the technology is mature enough where that's available at a cost where it just makes sense for me to build it or buy it because, just like, I don't know, electric mountain bikes are dropping in price. It's the same technology, right? It's a variable speed drive, a motor, an electric motor, and the ability to control these machines precisely is what makes them powerful. So there's something interesting around the evolution of the kind of tractor, the classic internal combustion tractor, and from a horse-drawn implement, right? And basically the drivetrain was a diesel thing, well, steam to begin with, but then diesel, and that's got limited ability to kind of have torque speed control. You've got a gearbox, and essentially you can't go slower than a certain speed, and that you just get this jolting type. It's a step change, and what that means is your food production system has to grow as a minimum to make sense for that machine to be useful. Now, once you've grown into that, then you might as well make the biggest use of your machine, and you can see how that escalates, how fields become bigger, how hedgerows have to come out because your machine's kind of too big to maneuver around them now. And with that, you lose diversity. With that, you lose resilience, ecological, economical. And what about the next generation of machines? And this isn't just me, right? This isn't List, this isn't FarmNG. There's many other companies, organic tools in Austria, some really cool like open source projects in North America, growers who are potentially engineers or just know a bit about DIY, know a bit about electric motors, who are building basically very fine controlled electric tractors, implements for themselves, and basically easing their human scale production systems, which is amazing. So long story short, this machine stuck with me because it was useful as that tool, but it also has a kind of operating system that allows for autonomous navigation. It's a whole robotics stack. And so if you were a farmer and you were going to buy something with an interest, you're interested in robotics, but you also needed to deliver value today, this is a really cool machine. So we got the first one in Europe, and I was able to visit and kind of meet the guys out there, and to this day we're kind of collaborating on making the machine smarter, testing, with real farming systems, and becoming a bit of a point of contact actually for this brand in Europe, because other people are seeing it, noticing it, are interested in what we're doing. So potentially another kind of opportunity commercially, and you're detecting that I'm kind of making note of all these because they are essentially what my next task is with List, is to kind of make sure that we have a a kind of more commercial arm to the business as well as this exploratory kind of wacky R&D operation. So, okay, let's talk a bit more about the FarmNG platform. So the concept here is temporarily forget about the monitoring or treat the monitoring as tooling that can go on top of this machine as well as the tooling that it's going to pull. Now, it's important to mention here that we started to kind of build up we started to build relationships here with farmers. And so one such relationship is Gentle Farming. They are a multi-generational family farm here in the UK, fairly typical. They work in arable, so they grow grains on multiple hundreds of hectares. And it's typically very heavily automated, right? Like, or mechanized. And it's just a few people driving machines a few times a year, and the rest of the time it's it's kind of big, wide fields, flat fields, just kind of growing lots of wheat. The traditional or classic way of doing it is high input, high yield, little knowledge of what goes on underground. Gentle farming are different, and they've been really interested in analyzing their costs, their margins as a business, and they're doing some really interesting things around zero tillage. So Grandad Tony, who you saw in the previous picture, is a machinery designer. He's got machines licensed all over the world that are kind of direct drills. They kind of slit the ground instead of turning it over. So a very core principle of regenerative agriculture is minimizing soil disturbance. And so we're planting that seed in and covering it. And we're trying to do that we're trying to grow wheat in a permanent cover crop, grassland area. So, really cool, like, innovations, polycropping, doing rows and in between operations. And we need a robotic test bed in order to even like prove that it's possible. And that's the role of this FarmNG machine. We are probably going to reach its limit in terms of scale, but in the R&D process, it's key. And I would argue that for every ag robotic application, you will need something like this. You will need a step where you've got a tool and you no longer want to bolt it to the back of your tractor because it just goes too fast, or you can't see what's going on, or it's unsafe. You want a small machine that you can deploy, you can program, you can drive if you want, you can program, and after a while you can just send off and start timing it and see how fast you can do your calculations and imagine what your next machine will have to look like that is a lot more tailored to your needs. So this is a bit more generic, but it's a really important kind of R&D tool in that process. Okay, then there's kind of obviously the mechanical part where you put your tooling on there. Innovative, not innovative, you might want to put your existing tooling on there. You might want to use it in a completely different context, in a kind of multi-species, like a permaculture garden scenario where you teach it where you pick up one tool and you do a bit of weeding in one end and a bit of compost spreading in the other. I spoke about a very specific arable application, but it takes me onto the software side, which is you need to make it intelligent. And that's where, our real robotic skills start to play a part. And again, robotics is interesting. It's pretty open source. Like ROS, robot operating system, is out there. Anyone can pick it up. Anyone can get started. But there's a lot of core concepts that you need to know about: control systems, kind of positioning, like movement in space, like kind of knowing where you are and kind of comparing models to real life and kind of synchronizing your control system to that. Now, in a real farming environment, that can be pretty challenging. But what you can see there is, we tell it to go in a straight line between point A and point B. So that's very similar to what happens when you enter a field with your John Deere tractor, and you give an A-B line, and then it gives you a million like parallel lines. So that's essentially what we've written, is to tell this robot to go in a really straight line between 2 points. You can't do that when you're hand driving it, because you're only human. You're going to be, you'll kind of go over a bump, and you'll kind of steer it the wrong way, and then you have to start your recording session again, or eventually you need to start building your own applications on top, and that's a bit of expertise, and that again is a little bit of maybe capabilities that we can start to offer other people. But it also makes us learn a lot about what the applications are. So what are these regenerative farming businesses wanting to achieve? There's a reason they're reaching for new technology. It's because it's not available, or they see potential. And we want to be that kind of technology partner. So, okay, let's have a quick look at this. So this is that straight line that I'm talking about, and we're just testing. You can see all we did was a little implement that just draws a straight line, cuts a little slit, and we just keep repeating it. And so a lot of our work this year has been really getting the precision down, and that's all related to kind of GPS positioning, and again, a very niche bit of robotics that is pretty frustrating for a farmer, but unfortunately it's part of the work. Okay, so that's just a bit of an example. I'm coming to an end, but I wanted to, and we'll start looking at some of those questions. So we've talked about monitoring, and we've talked about tool carrying in a sort of crop production system. What about What about organic matter, right? So we started at the soil health end, and like what goes on underground, and that's super interesting. There's life there, and we're learning a lot about. I'd be really interested to. I'm kind of really getting into the idea of ruminants, just animals in landscapes, and the potential that they have, and maybe the bad rep that they have. And I'm not sure I fully subscribe to that view. Again, it's a shaded argument, but what we're starting to learn is that animals play a very important role in rebuilding soil organic matter. Now, soil organic matter is the dark stuff, the carbon, if you will, right? And that's the fuel for your plant. That's the nutrition for your plants. That's the bit that's lost from industrialized systems, because we keep tilling the soil, and it gets washed away, it gets blown away, and we need to desperately kind of refeed it. When you put in your raised beds, because vegetable production is really intensive, it takes a lot of nutrients out of the soil. You do that every year. You kind of add a bit more compost, you add a bit more manure, and that's what kind of helps keep that organic matter there. Now, at scale, you're also trying to do that, but how do you do that? Well, there's ideas around like green manures, and those are the permanent cover crop pastures that you keep growing, and your root system's going to start going down. But you can also try and bring animals back, like try and reintegrate parts of the food system that have gone two ways. Like meat and dairy is one system, and grain production is another. Well, clearly there's synergies, and historically they would have been one system, and that's why there's mixed family farms all over the world, and they have some arable and some animals and some vegetables, and the whole system kind of works together. But in our desire to kind of push for efficiency, we've oversimplified things to our detriment. So we came up with this concept of a mobile enclosure. So this is kind of like what happens if you want to put a herd of animals onto your depleted field to kind of basically eat the rest of you've harvested something, you want to graze something, and you want those animals to poop, and you want them to kind of be fairly tightly packed in so that they can trample it down. and build up that organic matter. The reason you want to keep them kind of as a mob is that's where you get this packing down concept. In the UK, we see a lot of hillsides of like sheep farming, which is just like big fields. It's called set stocking. You have a few hundred sheep and pretty much no one touches them all year. The reason that's a challenge is they're basically monocultures, because the animals, as soon as there's a bit of plant growth, an animal will jump on it, eat it, and then go somewhere else. And there's no concentration of this mass and organic matter that gets produced. So what we want is essentially moving often, because if they're tightly packed in, they will quickly get rid of food. And so we need to move them from patch to patch fairly frequently, like something like 12. So some people think maybe even every hour, like really closely, and or maybe even continuously. And so the estates, the arable estates, or like large farms that are trying to implement this in the UK, re-implement this in the UK, can't find shepherds because they basically don't. There's a lost profession. Those that do it are super busy. Like they're driving around all the time, just checking on different herds, and what they do most of their time is move fencing. So here's a real need, which is regeneratively driven, because we're trying to move, we're trying to just feed the land in a closed loop system. And the problem statement is we have a technology, like we are stuck at the fence thing where fencing is just fixed and we don't have enough people to kind of move the fencing around. So can we employ this kind of low tech concept again with the electric wheelbarrow, where we just have driven wheels, a battery, electric fence, and we move around? And so, yes, we thought that there's something there that's interesting. That could be a product. Let's build a prototype, which is what we're good at, which is what we do fast. And lo and behold, a few weeks later, we had a little prototype. And there's some happy sheep inside. There's some grass that's getting eaten. There's some poop that's getting trampled in. And this is just the first field that we put them in. But the concept works, and it didn't take very long. Now, what's cool about this is we can very, very easily, this is robotics ready. Like the drivetrain is there, the controller is there. If we want to add camera systems and kind of measurement systems and make sure that we move in a smart way when the animal's behavior changes and they're sort of ready to move, or the grass height, the average grass height on the paddock has gone low enough where they probably need to be moved, that we can do that. We can start to automate that. But what's important is to get to a stage where we can even test the previous concept, which is, hey, just move around. That's valuable enough. And so yeah, I guess that's where we are now, and that's very recent. So we're preparing to kind of launch this as a bit of a kit, a bit of a product for people to buy. We will send you wheels with cables on. We'll send you a box with the electronics inside with a battery. We can send you the metalwork as well, or you can source that yourself and kind of build a frame of your own choosing, mount those wheels, put your sheep inside, and you're away. So this is really something that we, again, one of those like commercial opportunities I should flag, but that we're generating and we want to start converting. So yeah, I guess here so I think that was the kind of last part of my talk that I wanted to talk about. In terms of where does the tech and the robotics go next? Well, you can see that a lot of these machines still rely on a human operator at some point, or human supervision. So I think where autonomy and robotics in farming is going next is fleet operations. How do multiple robots move, kind of work together? Where's home? How do you get around the farm? So when you tell your robot to go and do something in field 2, it actually knows how to get there. Otherwise, you have to drive it there, and you've saved yourself the sitting on the tractor. But often, if it's a spread out farm, you haven't saved yourself the journey time. So it's around that. Tooling, right? So we're looking at the next generation of soil sensing. Like I've said, we might be looking at the next generation of tooling as well. So low soil disturbance type tooling, weeding. We're seeing a lot of robotic weeding that is able to distinguish between different species. So suddenly these kind of multi-cropped, polycropped systems become a possibility again if your machine can go down and can weed selectively. And of course, we're looking at kind of more targeted platforms for the right environment. So, you can see that mobile enclosure for the sheep will work really well on like a flat area and it can go. It's actually quite torquey. But if we're going to go up hillsides in Wales and West Country and Scotland, we might have to adapt it. So, kind of thinking about the mechanics of things is probably on the agenda too. And on the business side, we'd like to continue to replicate this approach that we have. So, which is, start with identifying partners. Just have a chat, see if there's something mutually interesting there. Then find a problem statement that you're both long-term invested in and interested in, and then figure out how you're going to finance it. So, we're early stage, we're pre-revenue, so probably our opportunities to fund major things is limited. But increasingly, we're having good conversations, and so maybe people can say, you know what, you're small, that's fine. We'll take the majority of the financial aspect. You're taking some of the risk. Maybe we can share it. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe we find a really, really small farmer who's got something interesting and scalable and can contribute maybe on the technical side as well, or the product side. And so I kind of feel that the partnerships and co-development is important, but and then we mustn't forget about scale. So the reason we're doing this is to have an impact. And I sometimes forget this personally. I get bogged down with the cool problem statements, and there are many, many, many. But ultimately, if I'm building a business and we're building a business, then we need to have a strategy as well. And we have to kind of give certain bits of our, certain areas a good push, make sure they're a success before we can move on to the next thing. So it's kind of important to have this kind of scalable strategy in mind and individual steps to get there. So I think I've chatted enough now. I'm going to pause, and I welcome any questions, any discussions. Thanks for your attention.
Good stuff. Thank you so much for that. That was really, really insightful and absolutely fascinating. I know personally I have a bunch of questions, but there were some questions that came up. And then also anybody who wants to ask questions, they can do so live here. Feel free to unmute yourselves and ask any questions that you might have. But I guess we can kick it off real quick with one that was posted earlier. John Packle asked, did you say UK has become more resilient with food systems, or that it needs to become more resilient with its food systems post, the European market separation?
I mean, it's not my area. I'm not a politician, so I'll try and give a politician's answer, which is usually, non-committal. But I think so. There's twofold. There's opportunity for sure, and I think those farming communities who were limited by the Common Agricultural Policy, which is a kind of financial framework of farming, food and agriculture in the EU, probably saw benefit, like opportunity, and there's quite an ambitious scheme around. It's called ELM, so Environmental and Land Management Schemes, which tries to incentivize farmers for ecological benefit as well, and not just land, not just area-based payment. So I appreciate it's kind of you guys in the US have different incentive schemes, but it was around reimagining that, and so there's potential there, and there's kind of also a need become a bit more self-sufficient. But there's also risk, right? Because we've cut off our closest markets. And so actually, if I go around a supermarket, which I'm trying to do less actually, and trying to buy from local communities more, but if you go into the average supermarket, chances are the food miles traveled have gone up, and that's a negative outcome. That's a resilience problem. So sorry to give a kind of non-committal, sort of neither here nor there answer. It's both. So there's opportunities, but there's also risks, and I think we're seeing both.
Again, if you guys want to, you can unmute yourselves and feel free to ask your questions live, but I have no issue with if you don't feel comfortable doing so, I can read your questions. Al asked, this is really awesome. I appreciate your thinking of scalability. In order to better understand, what do you estimate would be the approximate cost for robotic services per an acre?
Sorry, I phased out a little bit reading so this was the second one down. Hold on.
This one is asking about the approximate cost for robotic services per an acre.
Got you. Yes. Difficult. I would say it is greatly dependent on the complexity of the R&D. Like from my perspective, it's almost like the R&D cost that you have to recoup. And sometimes that is multi-year. Now, if you can find a way to kind of start delivering value before that. So if you're sort of saying, look, I'm in the field doing autonomy R&D, but in the meantime, I'm also drilling next year's crop, then you're kind of getting that additionality. So I don't know. I think that's a tough question, but a good one, a good tough question. So to give you an idea on pricing of the hardware, right? We are probably with the FarmNG, like hardware costs to buy, probably sort of 25 in dollars, maybe like $30,000. Then you've got a bunch of development time. Let's put that aside. Then you've got like operational costs. I don't know how that compares to a tractor that I don't know how much diesel you get through on a typical kind of job, and I don't know how quickly a robot would be able to do it. I know that things like weeding can be done slowly, seeding as well. So kind of weed management could be really well suited because it doesn't matter if it's slow. You can just do it 24/7 and cut out the manual labor, and it could be that you're lower cost than manual labor. Now, if you've got to like harvest, then chances are you want a bloody great combine harvester, and it doesn't matter that someone's driving it because you're trying to bring in the crop like quickly before the weather changes. So I think certain applications will be, let's say, a lot cheaper, just and we'll see adoption rates first. Check out a company called Farm Droid in Denmark. They build a very cool 3-wheeled robot, solar powered, very slow, and it seeds, weeds. It doesn't harvest, but it does a number of different crops, row vegetables, and it's really successful. I think it's about 70,000 euros to buy outright, and it's flying off the shelves here in the UK and Europe because it's tipped over the value proposition, like the commercial viability side. Yeah.
That's very cool. So it's kind of hit that inflection point in terms of cost to what you end up yielding and producing for revenue. Very interesting. There was another question here from Kian. The question is, with a team of engineers, is the location relatively important right now? If there is a actual farm or a community of people who provide your need, will you move there and focus on developing for it? I think this question is based on like if there's a community of like people looking for what you're creating, would you be interested in moving to that location to develop for it?
I think the honest answer is yes. The practicalities of covering all geographies potentially for free upfront is difficult. The idea is that I'm a bit passionate. I'm sort of fairly passionate about rural economies being regenerated. So socially, right? So kind of building the skill sets back into rural economies. And like having spent a bit more time there, I can see that there's like agricultural engineers who like cover huge areas because there's not many of them. And they only have a limited skill set. And could they do with like a second colleague who's in the same van who just does like electronics and computer stuff? Definitely. Like, but could there be R&D operations based on farms? Absolutely. Like that's where they should be based, not in the city. Like the reason we're in the city is it's where the tech jobs are and where these skills tend to migrate. So I'd love to see more on-farm innovation, and I believe in that. And the machines that you see are based on a farm, and I travel there. If I was purely focused on the business, I should be living there, really. I should be in a caravan, like camping on the edge of the field, like doing 24/7 work. That's one farm, and I can't do the others. But I think there could be something really, you guys know a lot more about like decentralized communities and commute and kind of workflow, like work processes. And I think there's something around doing this innovation at the same time in real time, but across geographies. That could be really cool. Yeah. How you do that practically with the right team is potentially, a challenge to overcome, but exciting. Yeah. Yeah.
Richard asks, what are the most important steps the farming community can take to build more resilience in an ever more hostile environment due to climate regulation, etc.?
Thanks, Richard. Top fan. Thanks for joining. So I would say it's it's not a technical challenge, it's an economics one. So the businesses that I see who are really concerned about resilience, who are like at the point where they're like stressed and like either giving up or needing to change something, they are looking hard at their balance sheets, right? They're looking at what am I spending on inputs and what am I gaining? And that's where it starts. And maybe that's why, maybe that's the next step for List, is to be a little bit more aware of like farm accounting and like sort of understand where we make a difference. Because the technology can come as a result, definitely. But it's all about, hey, could I buy, sheep are something like 10 pounds a head. Like they're really cheap. Like no, like, you could just have a herd of sheep for not a lot of upfront cost and one of these mobile enclosures and potentially unlimited organic matter like manure. Like let's try and quantify it. So I think it's around thinking in terms of closed loop systems. So what are the inputs that I could get for free? Like sunshine, which, we do have a changing climate, but can we turn that into our benefit? There's a guy in the UK, Niels Corfield, who's a regenerative farm advisor. He talks about the climate resilient farm. And his angle is, look, turn your soil into a massive sponge. Because what we're seeing with climate is it's just extreme weather. Like we were experiencing, like Richard's in the UK, like we experienced this like hugely fluctuating what used to be like seasons now, like just very different weather patterns, right? Rain weather patterns, I would say. And so in the UK, what we need to kind of basically not flood our crops entirely. So make sure that we get drainage. And then in the long, like dry periods in the summer, which didn't used to be as long, make sure that we've got those reserves in the soil. And how do you do that? You do that through root systems. And so there's an economic benefit to not disturbing your plants so that they can grow longer root systems over multiple years. Like that's a bit of a mind blow moment. And initially that doesn't require new tech. But if you think a little bit forward, okay, well, now I've got a permanent cover crop, so I'm going to need a different tool to put my main crop in, and then to harvest that, or manage that crop and then harvest it, in addition to keeping the permanent cover. And can I start thinking about the extra revenue that I can get from that permit for the secondary crop? Like maybe there's two harvests, maybe there's more than one. There's a really good company here in the UK called Wild Farmed, and they do, I'm sure it exists in the States as well. I'm just using an example from home. They plant sort of grains and pulses in the same field on large arable fields, and essentially they have two harvests. They make more money margin wise off two crops because the risk is spread. So maybe the wheat doesn't do that well, but the beans do well, and vice versa. And there's co-benefits. So the beans fix the nitrogen which the wheat use, and so on. And so in terms of tonnage, both are down, but in terms of yield, like margin, you're better off. And they're more resilient in terms of ecology as well. So I think that's how I would try and characterize the kind of starting point. But again, it's probably worth hearing that from a farmer firsthand.
It's very interesting that you bring that up. I know that the UK recently had one of the driest summers in like 87 years. Was that last year? And
Last year, yeah.
And then it was followed up by an extremely wet, I think it was March, where it basically didn't stop raining. And that led to some farmers in the area kind of trying to adopt or trying out these more regenerative practices like companion planting, specifically the wheat and bean mixture. And oddly enough, he may be a bit of a contentious individual in the space, but Jeremy Clarkson, actually took on that challenge in his series, The Clarkson's Farm. And they talked a lot about how the yield may be lower, but due to the margin being higher, you're actually getting more value out of it because you're not having it. I mean, with the rising costs of fertilizer and everything being so drastic over the last couple of years, it was really interesting to see that. And for someone that was, who's definitely a petro head and really, in the earlier years didn't really, I guess you could say, didn't really side a whole lot with the whole environmental thing. To see him kind of make that shift out of what seemingly is necessity now to try it out, and then finding success with it's fascinating. It's great to see.
I think that's it. I think that's one of the good. I can't remember whose quote it is. I listen to quite a few podcasts in this space, and there's someone in the US, John Kempf. I think he said, maybe it's John Kempf, maybe it's Gabe Brown. I don't know, one of the regen figures. You can't be green if you're in the red, right? You can't, like, you've got to make it work on the economics first. And like Richard, I love talking to about this. He comes from that world, and kind of managing, and yeah, it blows my mind. Basically, I'm not an economist, and I think I mean, I don't know if I'd make a decent one or not, but like, it kind of blows my mind that a lot of farmers are actually really really sharp businessmen, like really shit hot on the accounting, because they know that is true resilience. If you're not around in a few years' time, then there's nothing to hand over to the next generation, and that's really quite a strong desire in this community, is to kind of leave the land that you're safeguarding in a better place, in a better shape than what it was. And in the meantime, obviously you've got to eat, you've got to kind of benefit from it as well, and others need to benefit from it as well. So Yeah, it's an interesting space, and I think Clarkson, you're right, is kind of like, it's interesting seeing it through his eyes and kind of just, oh, it's a cool lifestyle property, like living in a nice Oxfordshire farm, and then sort of learning about the role of ecology and kind of learning about the economics and the hard truths where you can't just throw bottomless money at it, because you run out eventually, and so you have to start um, farming along like those age-old principles of making a profit ultimately.
Yeah, definitely. I got another question that came up earlier. And this one's coming from John. You mentioned that farmers will initially be skeptical. Is that because you focused on more traditional farmers, or are regen ones also skeptical, at least until they see the results?
I think I guess I'll use a personal example where, like, my own father is incredibly skeptical of tech and automation, right? Like, in his worldview, everyone should be very, very close to the land and almost like growing their own food. So he's a sort of idealist. And in a way, that's a really good like critic to have close to home. And so I would say, yes, you've got kind of tech kind of people who question the tech, the need for the tech. And I'm probably one of those, actually. Like, despite being this like engineer and tech head, I don't think I promote the idea that you should kind of engineer your way out of problems. And actually it's a new type of thinking that creates the pull for the right type of tech. And that's the tech that we can reimagine together. So that's why I'm kind of trying to show possibilities as opposed to ready-made solutions, because I don't know enough about the farming need. Vice versa, there might and so I guess I'm starting to meet farmers and farming businesses who are sort of on the same journey themselves, who are like, okay, I'm starting to do things differently, and I'm my old tools don't really work, so I can't, like, I need new tools, but I don't have the skills to build them really. I know it can be done, but I don't know how. And so that's kind of how we find each other. And it yeah, I guess it's that's sorry, I think I veered off from your question a little bit, but do they need to see results? Yes. And so we try and do that together. And because it's also about educating people on how slow and rubbish robotics are. Really, it takes a long time. You need patience. You need you need basically a lot of backing to be able to do it. And instant results are hard. And it's the same in farming. Like, you try something, it's a season. You try it again, you have to stick with it for a few years. And I guess we're in the same boat there, but that's why those partnerships are important, because you kind of rely on each other for a long time.
Yeah, and Richard points something out that I also really agree with is technology needs to be seen through the lens of helping nature along, not trying to circumvent it. And that's something that, like, at VDAO, we always try to talk about, is that technology shouldn't be used to hold dominion over nature, but rather tap into nature's abundance and really work with the land to teach us how to, improve our systems and work with the natural systems. And I guess that there's a bit of a question there as well, is with these technologies that you're beginning to apply towards regenerative farming, what are some of the things that you're starting to see that we can learn quickly from these applied systems that you're putting into place?
I think the role of diversity is really interesting. So I think one of the proxies for like biodiversity mapping is like number of species you can count, and that's actually not that difficult. So you can take a picture of something like a wildflower meadow, it's pretty clear if there's like 1 or 2 types of flowers on there, or like 10. That's a 5x increase. You can do the same thing with like a bit of an audio segment. There's really, really cool models, open source models. BirdNet, I think it's from Cornell. There's similar things for like insects. You just listen to something and you detect number of species. Low diversity, like fragile farming systems are silent. There's no bird song. There's no like insects buzzing. So, you can kind of use complexity to your advantage, and like embrace it. And like it doesn't matter that I don't know exactly what the combination of that flower with that other flower will be. Maybe if I'm really data driven, I can use a data set that List has gathered for me, or this kind of technology can gather for me, and I can really start analyzing. If I'm really interested in relationships between crops, I can then apply, machine learning, like kind of next gen, like computer science type technology, AI, if you want to call it, and just kind of crunch big data sets that previously has not been, until very recently, has not been available to most of us. And now suddenly is. Our computers are super powerful. The software is available. You can map relationships, and you could detect something like, this weird species of bird has appeared on my farm this year, and there's also been a massive uptick in, I don't know, some kind of yield. And I'm just, this is just an non-existent example, but that's the kind of opportunity I see with embracing complexity. And so what I'm trying to do is just kind of show what's possible initially on the data acquisition side, and hopefully, we can have a few examples of, correlating species count to the health of an ecosystem. That would be really interesting, right? And people will be interested in that, to kind of kind of for their various applications.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of experimentation that needs to happen in like there's something that stuck with me ever since Rob said it, was that it's not necessarily the destination that's the most important, it's the process. And that process will ultimately kind of start to define where that destination ends up being. You may discover things that like were compatible that you weren't knowing about. And then, it takes you in a slightly different direction. But yeah, definitely. There was another question here. This one comes from Al. Based on your research and work with big agro like monocrop grain farms, do you see the advantages for these farms to become syntropic?
I have limited experience of the large industrial scale agriculture production companies. I have some friends actually who kind of work for part of family businesses that are working still with those systems. I do see potential, yes. I do see potential. And I think it might not look super impressive at first. It might just be things like tilling the soil less, or using 50% less fertilizer, or like having having a companion crop. But if you do that at scale, then actually you can make some really cool, fast wins. In order to see that, in order to scale that fast, you need to see the evidence, the results. And so I think quite a common approach that I see with farms of various sizes is that you have a trial plot, you see how it goes. If that goes well, you start extending. And so that's a very kind of natural risk management strategy. We have it in our technology R&D, where we don't go all in on one thing straight away, but we kind of try and take small steps there. I can see, if I try and imagine, like in my mind's eye, visually, what a future food production system at scale could look like. Have you seen those? Have you seen images of like alley cropping? So kind of like big orchards with like a wide enough strip of arable for a combine to go down. So you can already see like different, like multi-layer kind of plants. And I can imagine that kind of scaling down to a point where robotics fit. And so, you're going, you've got grain in the middle, you've got vegetable down the other one, you've got, kind of tall trees, orchard trees, shrubs, and kind of like the machines fit around that, as opposed to the other way around, where we made nature fit around our tooling. But how that will look like, how the transition will look like, I don't know. Like I say, I think it might be less impressive looking at it from like just walking the fields. You might just detect like 2 or 3 different species instead of one. But I would love to see kind of hedgerows coming back. People are like in the UK, there's one very real. If you want to buy degraded farmland and plant hedges, the government will pay you for it. So there's an incentive, and the benefits are huge. Your insect life will come up, your biodiversity will come back, and all the benefits that come with that. So yeah, I think I do, deep down, I do believe that we will have more like diverse food production systems at scale.
Going back to the tech in nature, for the idea of like maybe not needing so much tech. I'm assuming, and maybe this is wrong to assume, but I'm guessing maybe that you've come across some farmers that you've approached that were kind of in the same line as your own father, in that less tech is better. How have you approached those individuals when it comes to the systems that you're looking to do, or even like how would an individual who's working on something similar, like us, for instance, we have a very strong belief that high tech, high nature is kind of a path forward. Um, how do you think is like the best approach for those traditional farmers that are more grounded in low tech solutions and prefer to move away from technology?
I think that's fine. I think, look, like it's important, like just like some guys will be into colonizing other planets instead of fixing our own. There'll be like that some tech people choose to apply their skills that way. Some people choose to apply it this way. And I think it's like trying to get through, that farming community is very diverse and the tech community is very diverse. So it's kind of trying to explain to them that you're not working against them. You're just you're trying to learn from them. And I think they do have I think it's sort of understandable why certain farming communities would be very suspicious of like new tech, because they're sort of tied into really, like economic systems where like they're leasing, they're in debt essentially just to keep going, and that's, they don't want another thing to buy to then not be sure whether it's going to work or not. I think I completely get that. And I think also some farmers will absolutely want to just not touch tech, and they want to touch the soil themselves, and want to have like animal, like horses, and that's totally fine. Like you should do that if you want. But I think the vast majority of people in both camps, tech and farming, will be somewhere in between. And that's where the mix comes, and that's where the opportunities come. So I think it's not to me it's not that exciting focusing on the edge cases. It's like it's really exciting when you meet someone who's maybe like traditionally kind of tech suspicious, outline a problem statement where they're like, yeah, do you know what? Like I can't find the manual labor for this. If you could come up with this weird wacky machine that could harvest this super challenging like fruit for me, then that would be awesome. And yeah, I hear that. I hear that all the time. Now, clearly, those problem statements are pretty difficult and pretty niche, and chances are scaling them are difficult too. But but I think, yeah, I think it's a broad spectrum, both on the tech side and both on the farming side. So yeah, it's finding the Venn diagram, right? Like, and I think that the overlap is probably larger than we think it is.
Yeah, that's again another thing that like we're focused on at VDAO is that we know that there's so much knowledge to be gained from both sides, particularly on the farming side for people who are looking to engineer solutions for regenerative AG, like, and then trying to get those two communities to kind of come together and share that knowledge and kind of commingle and cross pollinate is a big goal for us. Especially when it comes to like Web3 technologies. I mean, people in general are a bit suspicious when it comes to blockchain technology. It's still relatively very novel, and the media portrays it in such a way that, you know, it dissuades most folks from, you know, taking a second look at it. But there are ways in which blockchain technologies can be leveraged to benefit a regenerative movement, specifically around coordination efforts and, you know, funding mechanisms, like Gitcoin, for instance, or Give It, who we recently spoke with, that have the ability to tap into, you know, funding public goods, you know, so definitely we're trying to connect those two communities together.
Yeah, excellent. I'm very excited to hear some of your example of like Web3, you know, being adopted, and I'm sure there are opportunities. We haven't had the need or the chance to learn much about the technology as developers. But never say never. Might crop up. And I'm definitely interested to hear what you guys are up to in your community.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's been an interesting journey the last couple of months, and you know, our community has been growing and very well aligned individuals in both, you know, the technology side and, you know, the hands in the soil side of things. Um, Learning a lot as we go. I'm sure Al and John could both attest to that. They're both, you know, very active in the community. But yeah, does anybody else have any other questions that you might want to ask for Kristof? All right, looks like we did a good job then. Um, Kristof, thank you so much for coming and, you know, for sharing what you're working on, your journey. It's been fascinating. I found it very, very insightful. This is being recorded, of course, so this will be shared on our YouTube channel for those that were not able to attend. It'll be shared on our Twitter. It'll be shared in all of our socials. So, again, really, really appreciate you coming out here, taking the time. I know startup life is incredibly busy. Uh, so, again, really appreciate you taking the time to come out and share this with us today.